Welcome to the Hazy Vinyl Jive podcast. I'm your host, Scott Diedenbach. This is the podcast where we take vinyl records one at a time, tell you a little bit more about them, talk to just regular people, different person each show about what these records mean to them, what vinyl in general means to them, what these specific songs on the record mean to them. All right, welcome to the premiere episode. I hope you dig it. We're going to have my friend Dan on. We are going to be talking about a great record, one of my favorites, one of the records that defined my 20-year-old decade for me and defined my life when I was in college, and that is the Talking Heads, Speaking in Tongues. We'll be giving you background information on that all show at the first part of the show with me, and then we'll give Dan a call on Skype, and we'll chat a little bit more about that. All right, I hope you guys are ready for it. We're in for a ride. Let's hit it. All right, welcome everybody to the Hazy Vinyl Jive podcast. This is me, Scott Diedenbach. I'm your host. What we do on this show is we pick a single vinyl record that is out in the world, and we discuss it. I'm going to give you some background. The first part of the show is me giving you background, when it was made, stuff that you may or may not know about it. And then the second part of the show is me and a friend of mine, different friends of mine throughout the course of the show. It's going to be someone new every week. We're going to have repeats, but basically a different person every week talking about why they love this record, what this record means to them, any stories they might have of this record, which versions of it they have to go along with all the information I gave you at the beginning. So let's get started. This is episode 1, like I said, the premiere episode. And for this episode, it was tough to decide. What should we start out with? With a wide open blank slate, it's so difficult where to go. But I decided to start out with probably my favorite band of my teen and 20. That's an influential period in everyone's life when they're picking the music, really the soundtrack of their lifetime, you could say. It's the first time in your life usually when you are picking your own music. Maybe up until that point, you listen to stuff that your parents listened to, or that, the radio stations that your parents had on, or what was on in the house at the time. As you get into your teens, you start picking your own music. And it's my belief that music that you pick during that point in your life is probably the music that's going to be your favorite music for the rest of your life. So for me, one of the bands, if not the band, that represents that as much as anyone is the Talking Heads. And I decided to go with probably, you could argue, the premier album in the Talking Heads history, and that is Speaking in Tongues. Now, a lot of people would argue Remain in Light is their best Talking Heads album, myself included. It is actually my favorite. But Speaking in Tongues was a monumental record for this band. So I'll take it back. The year is 1982. So Talking Heads, just the previous 3 albums that they worked on, More Songs About Buildings and Food, Fear of Music, and Remain in Light, were all produced by Brian Eno. So this was the first time after those 3 records, this was the first time they had cut ties with Brian Eno, and this was going to be a self-produced record, produced by the Talking Heads. It was their 5th overall studio album, their first album being Talking Heads 77, then More Songs About Buildings and Food, Fear of Music, and Remain in Light, which I just mentioned. So we're they're a mature band at this point. They've got a following. They've been on Saturday Night Live. That's when I was introduced to them, when they were on Saturday Night Live and sang Take Me to the River. That was when I heard the Talking Heads on Saturday Night Live sing Take Me to the River off of More Songs About Buildings and Food. I listened to that. I believe it was 1978, and I was like, this is my music. This is something that I am making the decision to go out, learn more about, listen to more, and really enjoy as something that is mine. So I remember that fondly when they were on Saturday Night Live, and it was great, and it never went back from there. So the other kind of quirky thing about this record, their last album that they made before this was Remain in Light, and that was released in 1980. Now, Speaking in Tongues wouldn't be out until 1983. June 1st, actually, of 1983 is when it was released. So there's this 3-year hiatus in there where there was no Talking Heads album. Now, during that time, every one of the 4 primary band members released solo material. So they were still working on stuff. You know, they were doing stuff, and they were promoting their other 4 albums that they had going out there. But it had been a while since we had a fully formed Talking Heads album. So like I said, this was released on June 1st, 1983. Now, the label this is on is Sire. Like all the records up to this point were on Sire, and Sire is just such a great match for the Talking Heads. Like I said, they've been on all the previous Talking Heads albums, and Sire was really one of those labels that was really signing big new wave. If you're gonna define the new wave era, the Talking Heads is one of the bands you're probably going to mention. There are a lot of other ones that I'm sure we will talk about on this show later, but the Talking Heads they're going to be in that discussion, right? And Sire was doing a great job of signing a lot of these bands, recognizing this music for what it was and taking it. I mean, and then they also signed Madonna too, right? So, you know, they knew what they were doing. At the same time, though, Talking Heads is one of the bands that brought them to prominence as well. I mean, they were a huge hit for Sire and a signing for Sire. Now, for Speaking in Tongues, the artwork on this album, the original plan was they were going to have artist Robert Rauschenberg was going to do he went on to win a Grammy for this album, but he was going to do a special cover that had, for the LP version, that had these clear vinyl. It was going to be a clear vinyl record, and then there was going to have these 3 primary colored discs that spun, and so it had a clear jacket, almost like a DVD case that we have today, or maybe even a CD case that we have today. It's going to have like a clear jacket that was made out of plastic, and then attached to both sides of this clear jacket were these colored discs that would turn, right? And then inside, those were on a center point, and then you would set the clear vinyl album on that center point, and then you could close the whole thing. When you had the album out, though, you could rotate these clear plastic discs, and they would form, and then look at it from the outside. It helped a little bit if you held it up to the light, a window or something, and an image would come through the jacket case. So that was really cool. They brought this to the producer, to Sire, and they were like, yeah, this is going to be way too expensive for us to release as a general release. What they decided to do was they were going to make this because they knew they would have to charge a lot. They loved it, but they knew they were going to have to charge a lot for this. So they decided to make this a limited edition, higher priced release. They only made 50,000 of these. And yeah, I have one. It's really cool. The clear vinyl is cool. But they realized, yeah, this can't be the general release. We're not going to sell this for anything, approaching what we can sell. So what they did for artwork on the general release, and in case you're not familiar with it, it is a predominantly yellow cover. It's got a blue disc-like painting. You can kind of see the brushstrokes on this, what looked like an oil painting. So it's got this light blue circle in the center, and then in the 4 corners it's got like a border artwork around the edges, and then in each of the 4 corners there's this chair, just some random chair that is tilted and sitting on the floor in different positions, different ways. Like one time it's up on the arm on the left, one time it's laying back on the back of the chair with the legs pointing at you. And so this random chair just in these 4 different spots around the corners of the album. If anybody knows what the significance of that chair is, send me an email. Let me know, because I would be very, very curious to know if there is some significance to that. I could not find anything, and I've never heard that there is any significance to that. So the Speaking in Tongues album became the group's highest ranking album on the U.S. Billboard 200, and it produced their first and only top 10 hit. And that hit was, of course, Burning Down the House. If you were around at that time listening to music, you will remember Burning Down the House was a huge song for Talking Heads, and just in general, you'd hear it all the time. This was in MTV heyday. I remember I was in high school when this came out, and it was the video was on all the time, and it had the great images of the flames that were projected against a barn. So it looked like these flames were on this barn. I'll never forget that. And then they projected David Byrne's face down onto the road as they were moving, and so his face is singing while it's going across this road that's being driven on. So really kind of cool stuff. And I know the video was very popular, and like I said, it was their first and only top 10 hit. The genre that you put this record in, like I said, I think you'd have to call it new wave, but and also art rock, right? And one of the things that's important about this record is a lot of people, when it came out, a lot of album reviewers and Rolling Stone and all these different organizations that were reviewing music at the time, they described that it smashed these boundaries of, art rock, that were around the music scene at the time. It still definitely is art rock, but because it managed to incorporate different funk styles, I mean, the funk influence is going to be, of course, very strong from Chris Franz and Tina Weymouth. I mean, they went on to do great funk stuff with the Tom Tom Club, of course. So I'm sure their influence on the funk side was very important. But it also, so it had those rhythms and stuff into it. And that helped break down this, this snootiness, right? This pretentiousness that art rock tended to have at the time. So that kind of helped that. The other thing that helped it is the other thing that was influencing this album is there was some gospel influences into this, right? I mean, gospel music has got a long history of, great artists and singers and stuff. But specifically in the song Slippery People. And gospel, one of the famous techniques in gospel music is this call and response, right? Where the singer will say something and then he gets a response. He or she gets a response from the choir or the band or whatever. And in the song Slippery People, David Byrne and the band kind of go through this. I don't know if you remember, but, David Byrne is calling out, "What's the matter with him?" And the band replies, "He's all right." He says, "How do you know?" And they reply, "The Lord won't mind." So you have this call and response that's very evident in this album. So that was definitely an influence on what was going on. And then a lot of other people were saying, they're hearing like John Lee Hooker, some blues style from John Lee Hooker. And I think that's true too. If you listen to the tune Swamp, there's some definitely John Hooker blues, influence that you can hear in that tune, as well as other small parts, I think, throughout the album. But Swamp is the track, I think, that you hear that the most. The original vinyl playtime was 40 minutes and 50 seconds, so it's a typical length record. Here, and then one of the important things. I mean, yes, we all know how important the producer is, and like I said, this was their first self-produced album, and they had left doing stuff with Brian Eno, but also important on any vinyl release, as we all know, is who is doing the mastering. Who is the mastering engineer? The mastering engineer for this album is none other than Ted Jensen. So Ted Jensen, if you don't know, Ted Jensen is the man for mastering engineers, right? Especially around this time. I'm going to list off, so this is in the 80s, the Speaking in Tongues came out, but some of his famous stuff that he did just prior to this, leading into this. 1976, Hotel California with the Eagles. I mean, come on. 77, Exodus, Bob Marley and the Wailers. Also in 77, The Stranger, Billy Joel. 78, 52nd Street with Billy Joel. 78, Babylon by Bus by Bob Marley and the Wailers. One of my favorite albums of all time that we will definitely be doing on this show in 1978, Joe Walsh. But seriously, folks, also in 78, Kaya, Bob Marley and the Wailers, and also in 78, Some Girls by the Rolling Stones. I mean, if you go look on Wikipedia and just look up Ted Jensen discography, this is just, I'm just scratching what he did just in the 70s. And the stuff he's done since then is just amazing. So that's one of the reasons why this record sounds so, so good. The band that they had at the time, of course, we got the four primary members of Talking Heads. David Byrne, vocals, keyboard, guitar, synth, and percussion. I mentioned Chris Franz, of course, the drummer, backing vocals and the synth. Tina Weymouth, bass, backing vocals, synth, and guitar. And Jerry Harrison. He's the only one I haven't mentioned yet. on keyboards, synthesizer, guitar, and backing vocals. Jerry Harrison went on to do, he's done tons of stuff. He's produced stuff, and I really like his albums that he made after the Talking Heads broke up. So he's definitely a key member of what was going on with that band. But this is the period, too, where the Talking Heads started having these extended band, right? As you see in the movie Stop Making Sense. So the tour for Speaking in Tongues is what was filmed for the 1984 film Stop Making Sense. So and if you remember, there's not only those 4 members in that movie that band that they have on stage, and you probably remember how they come out one at a time, which I just think is great, and it was awesome. But some of the people that they have, so Steve Scales was, not just in Stop Making Sense, he was also on Speaking in Tongues, and he was a percussionist with Burning Down the House and Moon Rocks. Alex Weir, making Flippy Floppy Swamp, Moon Rocks, he's on Pull Up the Roots, part of the funk band The Brothers Johnson. If you ever get a chance and you're on Discogs and you're looking for some vinyl, you can find you want to listen to some funk, you can find the Brothers Johnson albums for $2 to $3. And Alex Weir was the cousin of George and Louis Johnson, and he appears on Stop Making Sense, and he was in Speaking in Tongues when they recorded some of that. So very, very cool guy to listen to, and you can go find out more about him. But probably the premier member of the extended band has got to be Bernie Worrell. Bernie Worrell was on the synthesizer. Bernie Worrell just passed away about 2 years ago, I believe. And he's on the synthesizers in Girlfriend is Better. Bernie Worrell was a founding member of Parliament Funkadelic. This is like having Bernie Worrell there is almost like having an additional band leader. He's got 60 albums, I believe, credited to him on Wikipedia that he's actually part of playing on, so that's just an incredible list of stuff for him. So Bernie Worrell, a huge member of that extended part of the band at the time, and very, very important. So like I said, this was the highest ranking record that they ever had on Billboard. It got up to number 15, and Burning Down the House got up to number 9 as a single, so that was important. This Must Be the Place, or what's called the Naive Melody, that had some success. That was in the top 100. But the album as a whole eventually goes on to become double platinum, over 2 million copies sold. So we've got this general release version that I have, which is this is the original. I still have the version I bought the weekend that this came out. We used to have record stores back then that sold new records, and I guess we still have those today, but you know what I mean. That was the primary way to get music, and I remember going to the store with my dad and buying this album. We immediately brought it home and taped it on the cassette tape like 3 times, one for me, one for my brother, one for my dad, and I still have that record. So this is part of the appeal of having vinyl. If I had this on CD or if I had this on a memory stick, right, there's nothing really to pass on with MP3 files. If someone passes on MP3 files to you, they don't really mean that much, right? You don't have the attachment. But when I put this vinyl record on and listen to and that needle is traveling in the same grooves that it traveled in that day that my dad and brother and I sat and recorded this album while we sat at the kitchen table listening to it 3 times through. There's something about the connection that you get from that is just irreplaceable in any other form of medium. So, with that said, we're going to go on. We're going to call up my buddy Dan, Skype actually, my buddy Dan, who is also a big fan of this album, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this. We're going to go through the tracks and talk a little bit more about why this record is so special to us. All right, Dan, how are you doing, man?
Hey, I'm excellent. How you doing, Scotty?
I'm good, man. We're here. We're talking about vinyl, man. I'm always good.
Yeah.
When that's the case. We're here to talk
vinyl.
Yeah, man. We're here to talk about the 1983 Talking Heads release, Speaking in Tongues. Do you remember 1983?
I do. And what's great is when you mentioned it, it just sparked a bunch of different thoughts and memories. That summer when this album came out was also the summer of when Police released Synchronicity.
Oh, good call. Yes.
Right. And I remember that summer driving around. I had a little Mazda hatchback with speakers in the back that I had custom built, blasting both Speaking in Tongues and Synchronicity and the Ramones. I forget which Ramones album had come out.
Oh, man.
All summer long.
Oh, my God. That's so excellent. You had them on cassette, I'm assuming, right?
Synchronicity, I bought the cassette and then I recorded the other two.
Okay.
I think the Ramones, a friend of mine gave them to me. My friend Jimmy gave me the Ramones.
And that's
or something.
What a lot of people don't realize if they weren't like alive listening to music back then is you could wear a cassette out. I would have cassettes that I would play so much that they would wear out, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's not like CDs that last basically forever. You would play your cassettes until you wore them out.
Yeah.
Because you were digging it.
And the technology back then was great if you recorded from vinyl onto a really good. I mean, at the time I got super geeky and I don't even remember. Was it TDX and Maxell had a war going on or something about the best tape?
Yeah, TDK, you mean?
Yeah, TDK. Excuse me.
Yeah.
And I remember, recording from vinyl onto a cassette. If you had a really good recorder, it was just like, yeah, why not? Why wouldn't you do that?
Oh, yeah, that was the thing, right? Anytime I'd buy a record, I'd take it home, record it, and then immediately put the record back on the shelf. And so as now, 30, 40 years later, all my records have been played like 5 times, maybe, because I'd play the cassette for the rest, forever until it wore out. So, 1980. So which version of I almost said Stop Making Sense. Which version of Speaking in Tongues do you have?
I have both the original release and the Rauschenberg version.
Limited edition.
And the one I have is the original release is 759923881.
Okay. I don't know. So is I don't know if was that. So mine is, I have the same one. I have the general release, which is 1-23883. Looking, just so people know, I'm seeing that, like if you wanted to buy a copy of this now, if you want to get it in like near mint, you're looking around $30 to $40. Plus shipping. So that's kind of like where we're talking for this one, just so people know. And this one, the one I've got, it was in the Winchester. It's the Winchester variant. So it's like the Capitol Records, who was the parent company of Sire at the time. Yeah. They had that Winchester plant that had been around since the late 60s. And that's where this one was pressed. And then I think you have a second version, right?
Yeah, the Rauschenberg version.
Yes. Tell me about it.
I remember picking it up at a record store, just seeing it and kind of almost dropping dead because I didn't know it had come out.
Right.
And at the time, it was a little bit more expensive than I remember just going, oh, wow, that's a little bit more expensive than the actual release.
Right.
But I got it because, one, it's amazing. And two is I always liked Rauschenberg.
Okay.
And so it was kind of like a mashup of 2 favorite artists of the times. And it was just, I'd never seen anything like it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, I was blown away.
So why were you into Rauschenberg? What got you into Rauschenberg? Why was that something that caught your eye?
So at the time I was living in Kansas City, and as a kid, I grew up in Kansas City, part of my childhood. And Rauschenberg went to school at the Kansas City Art Institute.
Okay.
And there's a really great museum called the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art in Kansas City, and they had one of his paintings featured in their contemporary art. Uh-huh. It's called Tracer, and it's from 1963, and it always got me. It's huge, and it was on a wall, and I just remember seeing it. And it's the Nelson Atkins is a nice museum. It's got a really great general collection, and they've really bumped up the contemporary, since I moved away.
Mm-hmm.
But that was one of the lone contemporary pieces at the time. And so, there was always lots of Thomas Hart Benton because he was from Kansas City, and kind of classic and impressionist. But I always kind of like the more contemporary stuff,
yeah,
and the unusual stuff. And this just stuck out. And so the kind of art I've always liked was the kind of art that poked and provoked.
Yeah,
which is kind of why I liked punk music. Why I really liked Rauschenberg, because it stuck out like a sore thumb in a great way.
Yeah,
and he was kind of thought of as a neo-Dadaist.
Okay. Yep.
Thinking back to Duchamp and Jasper Johns was a contemporary, and they were kind of grouped together. And so, that always got me. And then I saw this, and it was just like, wow.
So you immediately saw this and went, "That's Rauschenberg."
Yeah.
Yeah. Without even you didn't have to you knew immediately that that's what that was.
Yeah. There's the silkscreen quality, or the images, the contemporary images in his work that's mixed with classic, or just object art.
Yeah.
And I saw this and I was just like, oh my God.
So what are your favorite parts about talking about the limited edition release? I mean, what else do you like about it? Just
the color of cyan and magenta.
Yeah. Yeah. I already described it, so people can kind of picture what it looks like, I think. So, but yeah, the way you rotate those discs is and you can kind of create your own art.
For the longest time, I didn't take off the wrapper.
Sure.
I want to keep this. This is a work of art.
Right.
And then finally I broke down and one day opened it, and I probably shouldn't have, because it'd probably be worth a lot more. Not that I really care about the value of it.
Yeah.
And I just had to spin, on the front, the magenta side of it, there's the clear see-through, because I was trying to figure out what the images are on here.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the number kind of ruler thing that kind of corresponds, thinking about now is track listing kind of thing. But there's also a bicycle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I never really thought about at all. But there's a bicycle, and you really see it when you open it up and you take the record out, and you see the blue spinner on the inside, and the photographs are much more clear.
Yeah, sure. And then the record itself, I've kind of already explained, I think, is clear plastic. But the label, we'll talk about the general release in a second, but the label on the actual vinyl is different on that version, quite a bit different. It's there's not a list of tracks. They're just kind of printed in all weird directions, right?
Yeah, no, the entire thing is messed up. The Sire logo is black, and it's just up at the top. It says Talking Heads underlined, and then Speaking in Tongues, and then just the songs are every which way. Yeah,
so if you don't really know, it's hard to know. I think there is an A and a B somewhere on the label, but it's best to just know which is side A and which is side B.
Yeah, there's an A in capital near the Sire logo,
right?
And there's let's see if there's a B. Yeah, there's a B again near the top with the Sire logo. I mean, the brilliance of it, the magenta on my copy is faded, but the blue, on the outside of the packaging, but that hot pink is still hot pink on the label, and the blue is just gorgeous, and the inside spinner is still, it's that beautiful color.
That's nice. Yeah. I think it sounds like mine isn't in perfect shape either, but yours is in better shape for certain things, and mine might be in a better shape for a few other little things too. But so that's funny. So for people that are curious to get one of those, you're probably pushing $50 for one of those right now. If you wanted if you wanted an unopened, you're probably in the hundreds. But if you want a good one that you can still play, that's near mint as far as the vinyl goes, you're probably pushing $50 for it right now. So online.
What about an unopened one? I'm just curious, because it's
yeah, I don't know specifically, but I'm sure that's probably over 100, probably in the 150 range.
Yeah, I might go do a search and just go look for.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see how they survive.
Right. Sure. I'm sure there's some unopened ones out there. That still exists. So, but let's talk about the general release for a little bit, because I know you got that. I kind of described it, and so for people know, the thing that cracks me up, and maybe you know this because I threw the question out there, is on the cover of, obviously we have the predominantly yellow cover. It says Talking Heads in the broken up text at the top and Speaking in Tongues in the center at the bottom, all caps. But what is the significance of the chair? Do you know?
No, I don't. I mean,
neither do I.
David Byrne craziness, right?
Yes, exactly. So people know, while Rauschenberg did the limited one, David Byrne actually did the artwork for the general release. So that's the one we're looking at now. So, yeah, I don't know what that chair is supposed to mean, where it came from, or what it's doing there.
It's just, it's one of those artistic jumbles, because the photographs and the color scheme almost kind of don't match the rest of the cover art.
Yeah, right. Because the rest, the color scheme to this, to me, looks like very Mexican art style. Would you say? Yeah, with the
or even African.
Yeah, or African for sure. Yeah, maybe African with those dotted blue lines around that blue center circle. That could definitely be true. Yeah, and then it's got the African green, but then the Mexico has the red, white, and green too. So it's very, very great color choices by him on this cover. Yeah,
and the back side of it is just it's equally as wonderful as the front side, but it's just, the chairs I never got.
Yeah.
I mean, they're cool.
Yeah.
I was just like, okay, yeah, awesome.
And so then just describing like the general release, one of the things with the vinyl, and now on the general release, the vinyl is black, of course, and then the label is yellow. The Sire logo is at the top, like at 12 o'clock, it's purple. And for people that don't know, the Sire logo is like the yin and yang symbol. So that's sitting up there on top. But one of the things they did on this is they don't have track numbers on the label. They actually have these little symbols next to each cut. So like Burning Down the House is a square, Making Flippy Floppy is a circle with a dot in it. And then when they credit the songs to the different people that were in the band at the time, they just have their name, and then next to their name is all the symbols of the song that correspond to the song that they were a part of. So kind of a unique way to do that, right? Have you ever...
I had forgotten about all of that.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Until I went back and opened this up, and I was just like, "Oh my god!" Sleeve notes.
Right. Well, speaking of the sleeve notes too, there is an included. The sleeve has what looks. It doesn't look like it was probably the first draft of the written lyrics. But it was definitely. It looks like a working draft, because there's the lyrics of the different songs are written out. There's things crossed out and then other things written in. And if you're a fan of the music, you can see where things have been crossed out. Like I'm looking at Burning Down the House, where he says, where he says, "I don't know what you expect staring into the TV set," was originally supposed to be, can you read that? It was originally supposed to be something else. I can't remember. You can kind of read it if I don't have really good light, but so it's kind of cool.
I could read it originally. I can't read it now.
Back when I had younger eyes, right? But you can see like where the holes in the paper were, and like a paper clip that was on one of the pages, and so just kind of cool stuff if you're a super fan to look back on and say, wow, this is kind of neat. Watch, you get a little bit of an idea of the evolution of the tunes. So, well, let's go through the tracks real quick. We don't have to go through every single one, but what is your favorite track on this album?
Okay, so initially it was Burning Down the House.
Of course.
Just because that was, I think, the first single.
Yeah, it was, and it was their only top 10 single. So
yeah, and it was all over MTV, which was exploding at the time. And
yep.
I remember seeing the movie Risky Business and cracking up when I heard Swamp. It wasn't my favorite song per se.
Yeah,
I love it. But I remember it being, and it's like, where'd that come from?
Right, exactly.
It's just out of left field. It's just like, oh my god. In retrospect and nostalgically, it's probably this must be the place, Naive Melody.
Good pick, because that's what I would pick too.
Yeah, and it's just if you go through after they split up and you hear all the different ways that Byrne has reinterpreted this song. He was here in Austin in 2005. I wasn't living here, but he did a live show, and he had a band that was had a lot of strings in it.
Okay.
And if you can, if you look on Apple, it's available. It's like Live in Austin or something. And it's just a gorgeous one. His latest tour, he was touring with like a rhythmic drum band, and I heard a brief recording of it, and it was just like, oh my gosh. And that song, and then in the movie, I'm drawing a blank.
Stop Making Sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that version is just absolutely gorgeous.
When he's standing there with that lamp.
Yeah.
That's classic.
So, that song got me. The other tracks, that really kind of get me, and thank you for making me go back and listen to this in a little bit more detail than I had in a while.
Yeah.
And it's fun listening to albums all the way through.
Right.
You forget in this day of like singles and it's just like when you listen to an album, there's like an arc, side one arc, side two arc, and then there's the overall arc.
Yeah.
Right. But, like making Flippy Floppy, it's just like, everybody get in line.
Right.
My Girlfriend Is Better is just hilariously great. The thing that really got me was about this album is you really start seeing them mixing in Afro-funk, Afrobeat.
Yes.
Those types of guitars that would come more in prominence in their stuff like Naked.
Yep.
But you also, if you think about like when this album was released and their work output and what had been going on with Tom Tom Club, and and them breaking apart from Eno,
right,
and as a producer, and it's just you can almost see, and it comes to fruition and Speaking in Tongue or Stop Making Sense. But really, if you go back to side 4 of the name of this band is Talking Heads, which was a live album that was released in 1982.
Yes, is
that that side 3 and side 4 is so incredibly funky.
Yeah.
And it's because they have Bernie Worrell.
Yeah, I talked about him. I mean, he's a founding member of Parliament Funkadelic. I mean, you can't get better than that, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it just doesn't happen. So
for the show, I went back and I actually like sat down and listened to it all the way through 2 times.
Yeah,
and the thing that jumps out at me too, as well as thinking about track listing and really kind of what you're trying to tell over the course of the album, and then what is side 1 versus side 2. And sometimes you would see bands, here's the power side, here's the ballad side, or here's the best songs side, and here's the other stuff we kind of didn't finish or weren't as strong as the first, or you would mix them in between. And that's always interesting. And then you would get the great albums where it's like, every single one is just, or it's there's
it's almost like a greatest hits. Yeah. And I think, I think the importance of speaking in tongues is a lot of what you said. I think it brought them to popularity. It brought them to, it was kind of like a sign of things to come with the Talking Heads and what was going to happen in the future with them and Tom Tom Club. And while it's not my favorite Talking Heads album, they're all my favorite. I mean, Talking Heads is probably one of the most influential bands for me, but it's really important when you look at the canon of their work. This is one of the ones you gotta pay a lot of attention to, I think, because it really does some cool stuff. But that was the Talking Heads, right? Every single album sounded different. They never they didn't repeat anything ever. Everything is different.
No, and it was always challenging and interesting from 77, Talking Head 77 forward. Each one was different. And, it was a vanguard. And this one to me is a turning point because it took them from being art new wavy, those New York people,
right,
to the beginning of mainstream.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, the Stop Making Sense movie took them that much farther, and then their last couple of albums, did really well. But like everybody knew Swamp, everybody knew Burning Down the House,
right?
And probably fewer people knew This Must Be the Place, Naive Melody. But
is there anything else about Speaking in Tongues that stands out to you that you remember?
just nostalgia for it, just of that time.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, I mean, overall, just an amazing album of American new wave mixed with funk and African beats and just avant-garde lyrics.
And a band, I mean, and it's like, and it's a band in their prime, like at their peak, right? I mean, it's, you could probably pick an album for every major group, that's ever been. And what was the album that they put out when they were at their peak? And for Talking Heads, I think this is probably it. All right, Dan. Well, this has been amazing, man. Thanks for being on with me, talking a little bit about the Talking Heads, Speaking in Tongues. What a great album, and kind of why it's important to you, man. We'll have to have you. We'll have to have you on again, doing another record at some point.
Oh, would love to.
All right, I got one more task for you. So this is what I'm going to do so you're the guest on this show. You get to pick the record for the next show. It's whoever is going to be the guest is going to have to do the record that you get to pick. So what should be the next record that we do?
Oh my gosh. Do Bowie, Ziggy Stardust.
Oh, nothing like picking a small album to do.
Yeah.
Well, hey,
it's like
I got no problem with that.
Prior. I mean, I love that album, but it wasn't, I heard it through my stepbrother years after it had been done.
Yep. All right. Well, that's it. We will do Ziggy Stardust, the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars on the next. So the name of this podcast is Hazy Vinyl Jive from Starman, David Bowie's famous song Starman, where he says that ain't no DJ, that's Hazy Cosmic Jive. So that's where the name of this show actually came from.
That's awesome.
All right, man. Well, we will talk again soon, Dan. Thanks for being on.
Excellent. Thanks.
All right, that was it for this week. I hope everybody dug it. If you did dig it, send me feedback to hazyvinyljive@gmail.com. As you heard Dan mention, the next show we will do will be the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. If you own this album on vinyl and you want to be on the show, send me an email. Again, hazyvinyljive@gmail.com. All right, I hope everybody's getting to listen to this, spin some vinyl and listen to some vinyl. Until next time, be careful out there. Take care of each other out there and keep the records spinning.